Hello all, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever each of you may be. Welcome to this virtual side event at the 33rd meeting of the parties of the Montreal Protocol, where we will be addressing how putting a price on carbon can strengthen ODS action. My name is Maria Jose Gutierrez. I am the Director of International Programs of Tradewater, and I will be moderating and presenting in today's panel. So just perhaps to introduce our topic here, if there is one thing all of us present can agree on, I hope, it's on the importance of appropriate ODS management. Now, while the Montreal Protocol has been unprecedentedly successful in banning harmful refrigerant gases, pre-existing material around the world remains in need of a disposal solution. So in the next hour, we will address the work being done to undertake the challenge of finding, collecting, and destroying ODS gases, and we will highlight how carbon markets can enable this important and necessary work. For this, Josué, can you please go to the next slide? Sorry. Thank you. For this, we will be having 3 presentations today. The first one will be on behalf of Megan Lickley from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the MIT, on the existence of remaining CFCs and the need for a solution. I will follow with a presentation on behalf of Tradewater around the solution that's made possible through carbon markets and the work we're doing around the world to dispose of these existing CFCs around the world. And finally, we will hear from Vivian Ibor from City Waste Recycling in Ghana around her experience there with recovering and eliminating CFC stockpiles. So just a little bit of technical so that we're all on the same page. We will have a space for questions at the end as we go, and if time allows, I will open a brief window for any pressing questions after each presentation, but you're encouraged to keep your questions for the end. You may write them in the questions panel that you're going to find on somewhere on your screen for this platform that we're using. And also, please indicate your organization and country when you ask your question so that we know who it's coming from. You may also raise your hand with the corresponding function on the control panel as well for the question Q&A space at the end, and me or one of my colleagues will open your microphone in due time so that you can ask your question out loud. I would also like to note that we will be recording this event to later share on our website. We will share our website on the chat, and we can also share the link to the recording later on to the participants over email. Some may not be able to join us today because of time differences, so that will also help others be able to see the presentations given today. So without any more, I will give way to Megan Lickley so that she can tell us about her work around CFCs and other ODS substances. Megan Lickley is a postdoctoral associate in the Solomon Group at MIT, where she completed her PhD in climate science in 2020, and her research examines the drivers and impacts of climate change. She uses tools from data science that bridge climate science, math, and policy in order to assess a range of outcomes and their likelihood of occurring. And her most recent work evaluates emissions, banks, and lifetimes of substances regulated under the Montreal Protocol, which she will tell us more about. So Megan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Just pulling up my screen here. I don't. Are you able to see my screen?
Not yet, Megan, no. There, we can see it now.
You see it now?
Yes.
Okay. So yes, my name is Megan Lickley. Thank you for the introduction. I am a member of Susan Solomon's research group at MIT, and I'm going to be talking today about some of the work we've done looking at chlorofluorocarbon banks and emissions. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the modeling approach and a few of the key results of this work. So I wanted to start by thinking about some of the motivation behind this work. This is a figure showing the concentrations of CFC11 over time. So the horizontal axis is time, and the vertical axis is the concentrations in the atmosphere of CFC11. And I'm sure many of you have seen something like this before. This period of rapid growth in the increase of concentrations was occurring in the 70s and 80s when production of things like aerosol spray cans and refrigeration and foams, which were using CFC11, were in their peak production phase. But then following the Montreal Protocol, came the phase out of CFC production, and as a result, we've seen the concentrations of CFC11 as well as other CFCs begin to decline in the atmosphere, which indicates the success of the protocol largely. So why am I still studying this? Has the problem been solved? Well, a recent paper in 2018 by Steve Matska and colleagues in Nature suggested that there actually might be ongoing production of CFC11. So this is a figure from their paper that shows in blue and red here is the observed concentrations of CFC11. And then they also include here gray lines, which were previous projections from the World Meteorological Organization's assessments. So there's 3 different years of assessments that they've included their projections. And I've superimposed this red arrow to indicate that what we thought was going to occur for concentrations of CFC11 was a more rapid decline than what we've actually occurred. So concentrations haven't been declining as quickly as possible. So a lot of my research is motivated by why we're seeing this gap. And there's really 2 primary uncertainties that I've been assessing, and one is atmospheric lifetimes of these gases. So there are large uncertainties in how quickly we anticipate CFCs to decrease in the atmosphere in the absence of new emissions. So how quickly they're destroyed in the atmosphere has large uncertainties. But the other key uncertainty here is the size of banks, so old equipment that contains CFCs, and the emissions from these banks. And if you look at previous published values of bank sizes, they can differ quite dramatically by an order of magnitude. So this calls for work to better understand these sources of uncertainty and how large these remaining banks of CFCs are. So a simplification of the equations that I use, the modeling approach that I use is shown here. I'm interested in understanding total emissions. So on the left is total emissions, and when we think of total emissions are either coming from banks, so old equipment, or new production, which is prohibited under the Montreal Protocol. I'm looking in my work at CFC 11, 12, and 113. And when we think about banks of these gases, the aerosol spray cans aren't really an issue because they've been emitted. They're usually emitted within 1 or 2 years of production. What we're really left with is foam insulation and also uses such as refrigerators, chillers, air conditioners for remaining banks of old equipment. So to understand this problem, why have there been large uncertainties in bank estimates? Well, I would argue that previous estimates don't take into account the wide range of available data and information that's out there. So the effort that I've been bringing to this is to include as much information about production and uncertainties over time, and how that production of CFCs have been disaggregated into equipment type, and then how quickly those different equipment types release into the atmosphere. So the difficult part about estimating banks and new production is that these aren't directly observed. So we can estimate them based on what's been reported, but we don't directly observe it. And so we need to bring in more information to sort of check our best estimates of reported values. And a particular concern is whether or not production is being underreported. And there's evidence to suggest that countries have not always reported, not all countries have reported their data, and they have not reported their full, perhaps, production of these gases. So while we don't directly observe banks and new production, What we do observe is concentrations. And so if we're able to estimate emissions, together emissions and atmospheric lifetimes, we can infer from emissions and atmospheric lifetimes, we can infer concentrations. So the modeling approach that I take jointly model, so I simulate banks, I simulate new production, and I simulate emissions, and I include wide ranges of uncertainties for all of the input parameters, and then I constrain that range of uncertainties based on observed concentrations. It's a Bayesian modeling framework. I'd be happy to talk about more of the details of this if anybody's interested, perhaps after this presentation or offline afterwards. But you can also refer to some of the papers that I published on this in Nature Communications that have come out in the last 2 years. So how well does our modeling approach work? Well, this is an illustration here showing the concentrations of CFC 11, 12, and 113 here on the left, middle, and right. And in gray is the initial concentration range that we consider. And then red is our updated range that ends up making up our best estimates of concentrations. And blue is what's been observed. So our best estimates in red, by and large, match what's been observed quite well for concentrations. I wanted to touch on 2 key results for banks and emissions from this work. And the first is that our banks of CFC 11, our bank estimates for CFC 11 and 12 are significantly larger than what recent international assessments suggest. So this is an illustration showing on the x-axis here is time and the y-axis is the size of banks in gigagrams. And blue here is showing our best estimate and the range of uncertainty of banks of CFC 11 on the left, and then on the right is 12 over time. And I've included here previous estimates of banks as well. So we're within the range of some of the estimates, but our best estimates are actually much larger than what's been previously published. And just to give you an idea of how this could play out if these banks are left unrecovered, current banks could delay, if they're left unrecovered, could delay ozone hole recovery by about 6 years and contribute 9 billion metric tons of CO2 equivalent emissions. So 9 billion metric tons of CO2 equivalent, the EU has pledged to reduce greenhouse gases by 7 billion metric tons by 2030. So this is a sizable amount of potential greenhouse gases that remain in these banks and are subject to emissions in the future. In terms of understanding total emissions now, the modeling approach that I've taken disaggregates total emissions into bank emissions. So bank emissions here are shown in black, and then total emissions are shown by the other lines. So gray, red, and blue are showing total emissions. And what I'm circling here is the departure between total emissions and bank emissions in recent years for CFC 11 and 12 and 113. And what we find is that non-bank emissions have increased significantly for these 3 gases in recent years and are on the order of 23 gigagrams a year for CFC 11, about the same for CFC 12, and about half of that for CFC 113 in breach of the Montreal Protocol. So if you consider the greenhouse gas equivalents of these non-bank emissions, so emissions, when I say non-bank emissions, I mean emissions from production, this is about equivalent to the UK's annual greenhouse gas emissions. For CFC 113, these are allowed. It's allowed, production is allowed under the Montreal Protocol, but the amount that's being emitted is allowed as a feedstock use, but the amount that's being emitted is about 10 times that of what has been allowed. And then for CFC 11 and 12, this confirms previous studies of unreported or unexpected emissions out of China, perhaps other places as well. So non-bank emissions are significant in recent years, but the black line is showing bank emissions, ongoing bank emissions, and these are much larger than recent ongoing non-bank emissions. So the black line is significantly larger. It's about twice the size as new production emissions from new production, and about the total for CFC 11 and 12 is about twice the UK's greenhouse gas emissions per year. Those are the key results I wanted to share today. I'd be very happy to take any questions, and I'm going to leave up my contact information here in case anybody wants to reach out and discuss any of this. Forgot to turn my webcam on, sorry about that.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you very much for that presentation. It's definitely very interesting research and very interesting results as well. And they argue for a lot of action needed on those CFC banks that may still be out there. I would like to open then to see if anybody has any questions. You may write them on the question side panel on your screen, or you may raise your hand and we can open the mic up for you. Okay, we haven't received any, Megan, so far. So I would encourage participants to add any questions in writing, and we can take them at the end, or just let us know if you have any, and then at the end we can allow and open your mic for you to ask them out loud as well. So we can do that towards the end. Thank you, Megan, very much.
My pleasure.
Okay, so next up, I'm going to present. So let me just change that very quickly. Thank you. So as I said at the beginning, my name is Maria Jose Gutierrez. I'm going to turn on my camera as well so you can see me. I am the Director of International Programs for Tradewater, and I would like to present what we are doing to tend to these ODS banks that Megan was referring to in her research. So first off, we at the MOP, we are all working to solve for the ozone depletion. However, more recently, through the Kigali Amendment and others, in recent years, it has been discovered how important this work from the Montreal Protocol is also relevant to climate change. And we all know that time is running out in our fight against climate change, and we need impactful, scalable solutions. So to give a little bit of an idea of how necessary action is, the most recent scientific conclusions from IPCC's AR6 report, and that's the International Panel on Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, the group of scientists that do research around climate change, indicate that it is unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, ocean, and land. And this is not a mild statement, given that many reports that come before it have always suggested it, but they have never been sure enough to say it so affirmatively. Additionally, they say, unless there are immediate, rapid, and large-scale reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, limiting warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade will be beyond reach, which is the temperature that has been agreed by all parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change that is acceptable, if we can call it that. And finally, the scientists say that from a physical science perspective, limiting global warming to a specific level requires limiting cumulative CO2 emissions, reaching at least net zero CO2 emissions, along with strong reductions in other greenhouse gas emissions. And this is where refrigerant gases and ozone depleting substances come in, because they also qualify as greenhouse gas emissions, and important ones at that. So additionally, there is a report from Paul Hawken called Drawdown, the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming, which presents with a series of solutions to climate change, or unaddressed, perhaps relatively unaddressed action items. And it points out that the refrigerant management is one of the most important ones, and replaces conventional refrigerant management practices with important action. So what is Tradewater? What do we do and how are we attending to this? We like to call it a climate solution that you can be a part of. And this is because Tradewater is a mission-based environmental project development company based in the US, in Chicago, with offices in Costa Rica, where I am based and from. And we are fighting climate change by finding, collecting, and destroying the most powerful greenhouse gases in the world before they are released into the atmosphere. The additional bit here and that we'd like to highlight today is that we leverage the market for carbon offset credits to make this work possible. And I'll go more into that in a moment. So to reference Megan's presentation from just a little bit ago, she concludes from her research that ODS banks are still out there, CFCs in particular. And what we have found is that they are in fact there because we have found them on the ground around the world. So we have found, collected, and destroyed over 580,000 kilograms of CFCs in over 5 years of searching, avoiding, and we have destroyed these, avoiding over 5.1 million tons of CO2 equivalent. So you can see some pictures here of the work being done around them and all of the quantities that we find. And we continue to find them around the world. So we have actually identified outside of the US around 380,000 kilograms, that's 380 tons, metric tons of refrigerant gas in need of an affordable disposal solution. 75% of those are CFCs, and the rest are recovered HCFCs that are not eligible for regeneration for one reason or another. So if we were to collect and destroy these all, which we intend to do and we're in the process of doing, we would be destroying the equivalent to close to 2.5 million tons of CO2 equivalent avoided as we destroy that. So that is what we're setting out to do. And we find it in all sorts of places, states, and forms. So it comes from very tidy lined up boxes to cylinders out in a yard to some even in shops, that remaining stockpiles recovered or unused or virgin material, but a very old one indeed. So in finding these refrigerants, what else have we found? We've also found that the government authorities, Montreal Protocol implementation partners, and other stakeholders have been doing great work to implement the Montreal Protocol and protect the environment. So we have seen the results of the awareness building amongst technicians and industries and other types of stakeholders. We have seen the recovery and reclamation efforts results as well, with recovery centers and equipment distributed around the countries, and the capacity to use it as well, the knowledge to use it. We've even seen the ability from these stakeholders to develop destruction capacity, where either cement kilns have been adjusted to be able to destroy these gases, or other types of projects have occurred. However, at the same time, we have also found some challenges. And the ones that we'd like to highlight are the cultural and financial barriers that are present. So basically, we have found there are competing financial priorities and also a limited demand for reclaimed material that make the recovery and reclamation efforts very difficult. So from a technician telling us, well, yes, but if you give us the equipment and the cylinder, I still have to bring money at the end of the day to my family, and the time that I invest in that, well, is time that I did not invest in doing another bit of work throughout the day, or machines being distributed, but then as material is reclaimed, there perhaps may be a limited demand for that reclaimed material because of some cultural barriers or misunderstandings about the value of that reclaimed material. So that is what we have found. Therefore, we believe that disposal becomes a key piece. And that is because, so if we look at the waste management pyramid, where we want to go in order, and first we should prevent, then reduce, then reuse, then recycle, and then only when we've attempted recycling and done all the recycling we can do, then we should go to disposal. However, we believe that the recycling and energy recovery part of this pyramid, in the case of ODS refrigerants, is somewhat limited. So it cannot cover the full extension of the ODS out there that needs that service. And therefore, it is our, we work under the premise that hydrocarbons and hydrofluorocarbons, HCs and HFCs, should be the ones to use that existing capacity to recycle and reclaim. And the CFCs and HCFCs, which are either already out or should be out, like the CFCs, or on their way to being out, like the HCFCs, should free that recycling capacity for the HFCs and HCs and go directly to disposal, especially in the cases where of the CFCs, in any case, either virgin or recovered, and in the case of the HCFCs, especially when they are in fact non-eligible for reclamation for one reason or another. So how do we enable disposal? First, we are basically finding and acquiring refrigerant gases, eligible refrigerant gases, and I'll go into which are eligible in just a moment, around the world. And we identify and collect them for proper management. Once we have those refrigerant gases, then we move on to disposing of them to prevent their negative environmental impact. And once a sufficient amount has been accumulated through an authorized waste manager, the gases are destroyed, preventing a potential environmental negative impact. We then, with that environmental impact avoided, generate carbon offset credits through third-party verified internationally recognized protocols. And those carbon credits are generated and sold in such a way that the profits from them allow us to inject or to recover investment and to inject into doing more of this in what we call a positive cycle. So that is what we are setting out to do. And as I've mentioned, we leverage the market for carbon credits to do so. So in the United States, the CFCs we collect and destroy are verified and become carbon offset credits that we can sell into the California carbon market. And internationally, we use different protocols so that we can sell those carbon credits in the voluntary market anywhere around the world. So basically, this allows us to pay to collect, transport, and destroy the refrigerant gas from different sources. And then we have a full team dedicated to finding the corporations and other buyers who would want to use these offsets to be better stewards of the environment and offset their own carbon emissions. And that is how the business model works, in such a way that the carbon offset credits allow us to finance this work, to look for the refrigerants, which I've shown you pictures of their existence, but I can tell you they are not easy to find either. So we have to look for them, we have to acquire them, and then do all of the work around managing, moving, exporting, destroying, and verifying the work as well. The refrigerants that we can accept and collect are all CFCs, whether they're unused or recovered, and HCFC 22 only in a recovered state. So our international trajectory includes two initial projects. Aside from many projects in the United States, we've done two projects in Ghana, the first in 2017, about which there is a National Geographic article that you can find on our website, and a second one in 2018. And then we did the first project in Latin America last year, destroying 3,730 kilograms of refrigerant gas from the Dominican Republic. This was an interesting case as well, because we did not destroy only CFCs. The material that we found that had been recovered, there was virgin and there was recovered material. The recovered material was mixed CFCs, HCFCs, HFCs, all mixed in these 1,000-pound cylinders. So being an environmental emission-driven company, we decided to take it all for destruction and avoid it from leaking into the atmosphere, even though not all of the gases present were eligible for our project or for generating offsets. And then finally, the upcoming projects that we're expecting add up to over 300,000 of kilograms of refrigerant, as I indicated earlier. Just to complement then this information, we seek to be a company that's complementing existing efforts, and our value addeds include the strengthening of the refrigerant value chain where we work directly with local stakeholders who are involved in the life cycle of refrigerant gases. We buy these services in country, all sorts of services and assistance, and we work collaboratively with the existing efforts so that we can complement and not compete. We also are able to subsidize this important environmental work through the sale of the carbon offset credits. So this can help subsidize the search for even more refrigerant gases and the movement and destruction of such. We also ensure high quality compliant work, as our carbon offset generation process is verified by third parties, so we can ensure that everything is being done to the T, meeting the most strict legislation requirements and also TEEP requirements for the destruction process, etc. And finally, we seek to create environmental impact. So as our efforts prevent refrigerant gases from leaking into the atmosphere and helping reduce ozone depletion and fighting climate change. Some lessons learned from this work that we wanted to share as well. One is that we have found some unintended consequences of valuable efforts that can make this work harder, such as the Basel Convention, when we're seeking to move refrigerants from one place to another, that can elevate costs and complexity for doing so that we can get material destroyed, and also the conceived notion of illegality to sell pre-existing material, which has been perceived in some countries, but then we find some stockpiles that exist and we are unable to get our hands on them to destroy them because of this conceived notion that it is illegal despite having support from the government. Also, we have learned that results can be maximized, strongly maximized through collaborative action. So in some countries, we have strongly collaborated with the stakeholders I've mentioned, from government representatives to associations of technicians and chambers of commerce and industry, etc. And that certainly gets us much further in doing this work and being able to have an impact. Also, that without carbon offsets making disposable and affordable option, remaining CFC gases are at a severe risk of leakage in most countries. So these gases that we have found would most likely not have been found without the work that we are able to do, financed from the sale of the carbon offset market. Yes, carbon offsets. And finally, also very important, there is demand for the right incentive to act as a catalyzer. So we have found that if we are able to offer some economic incentive through the sale of the carbon offsets for purchasing recovered equipment, or then we incentivize the recovery of recovered refrigerant. Then we incentivize the recovery of such refrigerant that probably wouldn't have happened otherwise. Or if we are able to purchase some virgin refrigerant gases, CFCs, in a determined country, we can very safely conclude that that would have just sat there and leaked over time. So the right incentive that we can provide can definitely act as a catalyzer of further action within a context of already existing very valuable efforts. And finally, on my behalf, just to point out to some collaboration opportunities. So the first is we can help dispose of ODS in your country. If you have or know of eligible refrigerant gases, please contact us and we can make you an offer, or we can make an offer to whoever has them for acquisition and disposal. We would also very much appreciate any help in finding it. So it is not easy to find, and if you can help us find refrigerant gases in your network, community, etc., it would be greatly appreciated. And finally, help us spread the word and tell others in your network about Tradewater's work and help us connect gas at risk of leakage with a disposal solution. And that is it from me. You can find my email address here and our contact information as well. Thank you. So as both presenter and moderator, I'm going to move to asking if there are any pressing questions right now from anybody. I can see there's a hand up, and then we'll give space to Vivian, our last presenter, before we move on to the Q&A. But just let me just a second see here. So I see there are some hands up. I will open up the mic perhaps for, or actually because of the time, I'm going to, please keep your hands up to Dr. Malak and Balaji as well, and Jonathan, and I will give way to Vivian for her presentation as she is going to present the experience on the ground locally in Ghana doing this work, and around the first project that I presented we did as well was with them. So I'll let Vivian present. That may answer some of the questions I see here, and then we will allow for the Q&A section at the very end. So Vivian, please, the floor is yours. Or Jürgen. Jürgen, you are on mute. Just a moment, please.
Okay,
There.
okay. Sorry,
Good.
Vivian is a bit late. She thought it was 4 o'clock. It doesn't matter. I am the technical director and the founder of the company. I can start. Who will bring the presentation? Will you bring it in?
Yes, it is already here, and Josue will change slides when you need us to. So, can you see it?
No.
Josue, can you please
I
share
see.
the presentation?
I see only. Aha. Okay.
Perhaps
Okay.
while we can you see it now?
I think it's on. That is mine.
Okay.
I see only myself.
No problem. Perhaps as we are waiting for Vivian and while Josue helps so that you can see the presentation, I'm going to use this couple of minutes for opening up to a couple of questions, if that's okay. So why don't I open up the mic for, perhaps we can start with Jonathan. If you would like to ask a question, I can open up the microphone for you. Please go ahead.
Hello, good day. Can I confirm that you guys can hear me?
We can hear you, yes. If you can please tell us
great.
where you're from as well, so we can.
Okay, great. I'm from Trinidad and Tobago. It's a pleasure to be here, everyone. I just had a quick question. The targeted countries, I believe you mentioned Ghana and Dominic. Did they already conduct an ODS inventory? 1, and 2, the donor countries that were targeted for the disposal of these refrigerants, who paid for the shipping in terms of collection for destruction? And last one, if possible, are you able to share some of the specifications required for destruction or disposal or recycling in which you all conducted these initiatives from? Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. So regarding the ODS inventories, I'm actually not absolutely sure if both of these countries have done so. I can tell you what we found wasn't necessarily directly related to any ODS inventories that had been done. However, regarding to the payment for the transport for destruction, that was covered by Tradewater. So we covered for the transport for destruction, sorry, for the transport and for the destruction costs. And then we can in fact share some details about the requirements for destruction. Perhaps we can share that towards the end, so I don't collect too much time, but we just need them to be the eligible refrigerants and in good state. And then we of course have many requirements for the destruction facility itself, but we can share those details at a later time, Jonathan, with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your response.
Of course. perhaps just checking in here on Ghana and the city waste recycling. Can you see the presentation now? Yes?
I can see.
Good. So would you like to start now?
If you give me 1 minute, then Vivian is here.
Okay, no problem. We have other.
She's just entering. Okay.
Perfect.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, Vivian. Welcome. Just in time. Please,
Yes.
Vivian Aya Ibor, from the Managing Director of City Waste Recycling, is joining us today, and will be presenting on their experience around recovery of CFCs in Ghana and destruction of the CFCs as well, in a project in collaboration with us at Tradewater. So thank you, Vivian. Please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thanks for having me. So CFC, recovery of CFC in Ghana from fridges and air conditioners. Next slide, please. Since 2012, City Waste Recycling collected and recycled over 200,000 fridges and air conditioners. The degassing of the fridges and AC at City Waste Recycling Limited is done with our mobile degassing plant, which also decontaminates the CFCs from the oil, carried out according to the type of refrigerant. Mainly the gases that we come across are the R12, 134A, 600A, 22, etc. are the main refrigerants obtained and kept separately in cylinders. Refrigerants collected are 134A, that is 62%, the 600A, 26%, R12, 9%, and the others 3%. Next slide, please. That is our mobile degassing plant. Next slide. By 2018, City Waste Recycling Limited was able to retrieve more than 15,000 CFCs from R12 and from the Ghanaian market, which was traded for voluntary carbon credit through the Tradewater LLC USA. In 2017, Tradewater LLC started a pilot project with City Waste Recycling Limited, trading approximately 2,000 kg CFCs for carbon credits on the voluntary carbon market, and additionally traded a volume of over 12 tons of CFC in 2018. Over 90% of the CFCs were found in new cylinders on the Ghanaian market. Next slide, please. Tradewater gave during their stay in Ghana training units in refrigerant purification checking, storage of gas cylinders, packaging and labeling refrigerant cylinders for export to City Waste Recycling Limited. The Environmental Protection Agency, EPA Ghana, the Ozone Office, played a major role. They help us with the transboundary movement notification process. As you can see from the pictures, those are some gas cylinders for recovered refrigerants. Next slide, please. Tradewater gave during their stay in Ghana training units in refrigerant purification checking, the storage of gas cylinders, packaging, labeling refrigerant for export to City Waste. Environmental Protection Agency Ghana help with the transboundary movement notification. The value addition on ODS can strengthen ODS action because, in the case of City Waste Recycling, revenue generated from the Tradewater transaction enabled us to travel around country and other African continents in search for CFCs, which we discovered some volumes of ODS. Next slide, please. Challenges. Repairers or refurbishers of fridges and AC use all sorts of gases, which is cheap or available. This is the reason why we only reach a gas collection purification between 80 and 90%. We even found liquefied petroleum gas LPG used as refrigerant, which makes the degassing process extremely dangerous. Our collection and search for used and unused CFC on the African market came to halt due to the COVID-19 pandemic, since our search, as said, revealed that there is still quite some amount on the continent available for collection. Next slide, please. packaged CSC cylinders ready for exports. Next slide, please. The disposal and destruction of the insulation materials from frigates, mainly the PUR, is unresolved in Ghana. And this is mainly actually a challenge because we don't have the technology yet available on the continent here to take care of the foam, which contains a lot of the R11. And so if technology is made available or there's accessibility in doing this, we'll be able to retrieve a lot from the foam as well. Next slide. So in a nutshell, what I would say is that the future is bright because there's initiative taken by Tradewater gave us the opportunity to go around to the continent, and we connected with people in the sector who are refurbishing, people in the e-way sector as well, who still have some stock of ODS stuck in the various parts of Africa. And so for the topic as is being discussed today, when price is put on ODS, a lot can be done and the actions can be achieved. Thank you very much from our team and to everyone who is listening.
Thank you, Vivian. Thank you very much. And I love your final words where you say the future is bright. It's certainly a very optimistic and a way of seeing things, especially with the opportunities that are lying around and we can take to our advantage. So thank you very much for that perspective and for your presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, so we will take any further questions now, and I see I'm going to try and go in order. So first I will open up the microphone to those who had requested it earlier. Then I will read some questions that we've gotten in writing, and then I will open up the microphone to Patricia and Alexander, who have just requested it as well. So I will start with opening up the microphone to Balaji Natarajan. If you still have a question, please go ahead. If you are there and still have a question, please go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you very much for the very informative presentation from all three presenters. It was very useful. It provided a lot of good quality information. I have a couple of questions for you, Maria. One is relating to the cost of acquiring ODSs, which is like a challenge, as you are aware. Because as you clearly said, we have to go around identifying ODSs, not only identifying them, you have to figure out the quality of the material that you're receiving also. It could contain contaminants, it could contain various things which can potentially also be hazardous and dangerous, in certain cases. Now, from your experience, do you have an idea on like a rough range of cost per kg that you typically encounter in different countries? It varies with countries, which we are aware of, but in a typical situation, like from your understanding, what is the range and what are the cost drivers? If you could throw some light on this. The second question is kind of linked to what Jonathan was asking in terms of the quality control, where you gave a general view on how exactly you're looking at it. My question is specifically with reference to cement kilns. Have you used or do you have experience on using cement kilns for destruction? And if yes, what is the approximate cost per kg for destruction when you use cement kilns and the quality control mechanisms that you had on this? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sorry, Balaji, where are you joining us from, if I may ask?
I work with the Multilateral Fund Secretariat and from Montreal. As you are aware, we deal with ozone depleting substances.
Yeah. Thank you. So regarding to your two questions regarding the cost of acquiring ODS, it, as you can imagine, varies significantly country to country. So I can, attempting to answer that as best as I can, giving the fluctuation, I can tell you that it ranges from, in some cases, no cost to acquiring it, when it's in the hands of those that actually are very interesting in disposing of it and have kept it for that purpose of saving it from leaking into the atmosphere, all the way up to it goes up to perhaps $20 per kg, depending on the type of refrigerant and depending on the country, or even maybe a bit higher depending on the place. Regarding the quality control and your question around cement kilns, we have not destroyed in cement kilns, not yet, at least. We do recognize that it is one of the TIP allowed or TIP, allowed destruction technologies, but we have so far destroyed at incineration facilities like rotary kilns and plasma arcs. We do not disregard the possibility of destroying at a cement kiln in the future, though. As for cost, that is quite variable and hard for me to tell you at this time what the variation of that cost of destruction is. But we do have very high requirements for destruction facilities, not only those regarding to the TIP requirements, but also requirements from the ODS carbon offset credit generation protocol as well. So from calibration of scales all the way to of course, the destruction and removal efficiency of at least 99.99%. And we are very strict about those requirements with the destruction facilities that we use around the world. Thank you, Balaji. I will open up for, sorry, I see that the other person who had raised their hand is gone. So I will read some of the questions that we've gotten in writing before opening the microphone for Patricia and Alexander. So one of them is for Megan. Megan, Emily Valle-Watt is asking us, in relation to the impact on global ozone layer recovery of possibly 6 years delay, is this consistent with the SAP and TIP CFC 11 reports, or is this a result of new different findings or methodologies?
Thank you. So that's a great question. The SAP and TIP report used a different approach to so they did cite our work, and we were in line with a similar range, but they did use a different approach for modeling. They use a bottom up. So my work uses a bottom up inventory analysis and then constrains those values. They just use a bottom up inventory analysis. The more recent work that I'm currently a part of right now is updating the ozone assessment, and the modeling approach that I presented today is what's being used going forward in WMO assessments. So I'm hopeful and suspect that future TIP reports are going to be using these results. I should also say that the work that I presented today is now being used for ongoing work. So Steve Matska, who's been heavily involved in assessing the unexpected emission, is now using my estimates of banks and emissions from banks in his work. So this is now, I mean, I don't want to be overly arrogant, but I do believe that this now is forming the basis of future estimates of banks for CFC 11.
Thank you, Megan. We have another question from Vivian Blake from Jamaica. And she asks, how do parties to the Basel Convention ship ODS waste to destruction facilities in a manner that does not violate the transboundary movement restrictions? That is also a very good question. And in reference to what I was indicating about the Basel Convention and the complexities navigating that we have been becoming acquainted with, the answer to that question would be, we move material if we move it from Basel. So the two projects we have done have come from Ghana and Dominican Republic, both countries which do not consider refrigerant gases hazardous waste. Therefore, even though they are signatories to the Basel Convention, this material does not apply because of that reason. However, the following countries and projects that we are planning come from countries that are Basel signatories, and therefore we are intending to move that to a country that is also a Basel signatory so that we can absolutely comply with the Basel Convention and the transboundary movement regulation as well. I hope, Vivian, that I have answered your question with that. But we, of course, check any transboundary movement restrictions very closely and follow any guidelines that there may be and that apply in every case as well. And then another question in writing that we've received is from Pipat. I'm sorry, Pipat, I do not know how to pronounce your last name, but I'm going to try. Pipat Pupira Supong, who has two questions. The first asking about our indication that only recovered contaminated HCFC 22 is eligible for destruction, and he asks whether the business model covers HCFC 22 confiscated by the customs. That is a very good question, and one that we are working to be able to say yes to. So if you can share some more about to us, perhaps we will contact you and ask what it is you may have that needs this solution, and then we can consider that case and try to solve for it. It is something that we definitely want the business model to be able to cover, but at the end it depends on the carbon offset generation protocol that we intend to work on so that it can cover the confiscated HCFC 22 as well. And regarding your second question about a minimum amount of refrigerant to be destroyed to be qualified for the project, that question, well, really it varies, but I can tell you that we aim for a project to be no less than 25,000 tons of CO2 equivalent. So because I'm giving that to you in tons of CO2 equivalent, the kilograms of refrigerant will vary depending on what types of refrigerant they may be. So just to give you an example and some ranges, if we're talking about HCFC 22, that would be around 25,000 kilograms of HCFC 22. If we're talking about CFC 12, that would be around 2,000, 3,000 kilograms of CFC 12. So it'll depend, but we are definitely open to hearing about any possibilities of material, and whatever country anybody may be in, and however small the amount, we can always add it up to other amounts we may find in the country. So we are open to, we're all ears to anything you may have. Thank you, Pipat. And then I will open up the mic next to Patricia and Alexander. So Patricia, please go ahead. If my colleagues can help me, please open up for Patricia. Doesn't seem to be there. Thank you.
Hello, are you able to hear me? Yes,
yes.
Great. I have two questions, but well, I'll start with the first one. So you mentioned earlier on about finding the ODS and kind of, you know, to work with other getting intel. But it'd be great to hear more about that. And whether you kind of do any public awareness campaigns, or is it just through kind of investigation and intel through governments and other bodies? Is my first question. And my second question is about, you noted that there's kind of resistance to sell often due to the Basel Convention, and people concerned about selling kind of due to the illegality of it. Is there any resistance to give or work with you based on people's desire to use those gases? And do you come across kind of non-legitimate owners? For example, maybe they required it recently, and how do you manage that?
Thank you, Patricia. Those are very good questions as well. In regards to, I'm going to try and answer quickly because we are running out of time and have some other questions lined up. But in regards to the finding of ODS, honestly, we try everything we can think of, from public awareness and different strategies. We were recently featured in a BBC podcast, for example, and we've gotten approached from that to reaching out to government stakeholders. Any country we go into, we always approach the government ozone representatives as well. We like to work together and join efforts and offer our services to that. So we contact different stakeholders present in the countries. And regarding the selling and coming into all sorts of situations, we are always extremely careful about not purchasing anything that may have any flags of or signals of illegality, as we do not want to generate any perverse incentives at all, and we're very careful about that. And we do come across some cases where it may not want to be sold for disposal purposes, but we always try to be transparent internationally about the environmental impact that they may represent. And to be honest, more often than not, we come across people who are also concerned about the environment and want this to be given up for disposal. So that's the most common scenario. I realize we're coming just on time, so I'm gonna just make one. I just want to share, I want to open up the mic for Alexander, as I promised, and I also want to share that Kyle Winders in writing has indicated that he's from MOPIA and they may be able to assist with foams. So Vivian, I will make that connection after offline. They are based in Canada, but are open to discussing this further. So I would like to point that out. And just finally, and at risk of going over a couple of minutes, if I may, I'm just going to open up for Alexander so that he may ask one final question. Please, Alexander, go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thanks so much for the really interesting presentations. I'll try and be brief. So I was wondering, so does Tradewater specialise specifically in the recovery of refrigerants, or do you also recover other bank sources such as building insulation foams, or any other bank sources? So that was the first question. Second question, perhaps betraying my ignorance of how sort of voluntary carbon markets work. Is a sort of voluntary carbon offsetting mechanism, is that like a specific US mechanism, or is it operating, or does it also operate in other countries, and what sort of specific conditions do you need in country to be able to operate that business model effectively? Thanks.
Thank you, Alexander. Regarding foams, Tradewater currently does not collect foams. We are also working on making that possible in the future. We recognize it's a highly unresolved issue around the world, and we would very much like our business model to be able to account for that in the future. So we are working on that, but we do not collect them currently. And regarding carbon markets, it would be a topic on its own for a full session, but I can tell you that we sell in two spaces. So in the whatever is collected in the United States is sold within a United States California market, which is mandatory, but whatever we do internationally, we sell in the voluntary market. So that is basically works under certain parties such as Vera with the Verified Carbon Registry that set the rules and of the game, as to say. And then even though that is a US organization, the protocol allows for offsets to be generated and sold all around the world in the voluntary space. And I know I've just promised Alexander would be the last, but I realize Dr. Malak also had his hand up, and I will just open up for him as now the final question. Please, Dr. Malak, go ahead. Your microphone is open. You may unmute yourself.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for the speakers for this very informative presentation. And I would like to give a comment on the presentation on putting a price on carbon, how it would strengthen the ODS action. I am from Saudi Arabia. I'm a climate change negotiator. And my comment is noting that the carbon market and all the relevant discussions are still under negotiation at other conventions, especially the UNF, specifically, I mean the UNFCCC. We believe that this is the wrong venue for this discussion. First of all, this is not within the ozone mandate. And second, we're surprised that this inclusion in this, as this is an intervening with the negotiation and with the Paris Agreement negotiation that going to be reconvened in a couple of days, in few days. Under the ozone, parties agreed to discuss matters deal with the efficiency of the equipment, the safety, the technology, and it was agreed that the responsibility of they do not take responsibility of policy to be discussed. And we see this as an interfering with the negotiations and the Paris Agreement, as GHGs are discussed under Paris Agreement and Article 6 negotiations. So we are seeing this as a disturbing trend for going into the role and intervening with the role of Paris Agreement and the UNFCCC Convention negotiation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Malak, for your comment. We recognize that this is a climate change agenda as well. However, as we are addressing ODS, we wanted to bring it into this space. Also, just to open up any opportunities that may come from destruction of ODS in avoidance of these gases that are both ozone depleting substances and greenhouse gases, important greenhouse gases as well. But your comment is received and noted as well. So with that, we will close here. Thank you all for joining, for participating, for showing such interest in the work that was here presented. And thank you very much to Megan Lickley and Vivian Ayaibo for presenting as well and joining us today as panelists. It is a pleasure to share a panel with other women, and I would like to end with Vivian's note of the future is bright, and let us use the opportunity of the work presented here to find more ODS substances around the world and be able to avoid them from leaking into the atmosphere at the high impact levels that Megan showcased with her research of avoiding 9 billion metric tons of CO2 equivalent from reaching the atmosphere. So thank you all very much and have a nice rest of your day, wherever you may be. Thank you. Goodbye.